Looking back, I used to think my life was picture perfect. My name is Derek, and for the better part of 10 years, I believed I was married to my soulmate Sophia. Together, we'd built a life that seemed untouchable. A cozy home in the suburbs, a thriving social circle, and a bond that I thought could weather any storm. I guess life has a way of pulling the rug out from under you just when you start to feel comfortable. Sophia and I met at a wedding, of all places. She was the maid of honor, radiant in a pale blue dress, and I was just another guy in a rented tux trying to get through the night without embarrassing myself on the dance floor. She approached me first, confident, witty, and with a smile that could light up a room. I was hooked from the moment she teased me about my stiff two-step during the slow songs. Our love story unfolded like a movie montage. Dates turned into weekends together, and before I knew it, I was down on one knee, proposing to her during a vacation in the mountains. Sophia said yes through tears, and we spent the next decade building what I thought was a strong, loving marriage. She worked as an event planner, a career that perfectly matched her outgoing personality, while I ran my own business from home. We complemented each other, her energy balancing my more reserved demeanor. But now, as I sit here recounting our story, I can't help but feel like I was blind to the cracks forming beneath the surface. Sophia's best friend, Chris, had been a constant presence in her life since long before I came along. He was the childhood friend turned platonic soulmate, as she used to joke. At first, I didn't mind. Chris was charming, funny, and had a way of making everyone feel at ease. He was at all our gatherings, from birthdays to holiday dinners, always acting like part of the family. I had no reason to distrust him, or Sophia for that matter. I thought I understood their dynamic. They'd been through so much together: school, breakups, career struggles. Chris was the kind of friend who could call her at 2 a.m., and I wouldn't bat an eye. I wanted to trust them because trust was the foundation of our marriage. But over time, things started to feel off. It was little things at first, Sophia laughing a little too hard at Chris's jokes, or the way their inside jokes seemed to multiply with every visit. They had this shorthand that made me feel like an outsider in my own home. At gatherings, I'd often find them in the corner, heads close together, whispering and laughing about something no one else was privy to. I told myself it was harmless, that this was just the nature of their long-standing friendship. But the nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach didn't go away. Sophia always had a way of making our house feel warm and welcoming. She loved hosting, whether it was a casual game night or a full-blown dinner party. Chris, of course, was always there, often the last to leave, helping Sophia clean up while I retreated to bed, exhausted. It didn't help that Chris was so effortlessly charismatic. He had this knack for turning every situation into something fun, which made it easy for people, myself included, to overlook his flaws. But as time went on, I started to see the subtle ways he inserted himself into our lives. It wasn't just the constant presence. It was the way he seemed to have an opinion on everything, from the furniture we bought to the vacations we planned. And Sophia listened, more than she listened to me, it seemed. On the surface, everything seemed fine. We had just celebrated our 9th anniversary with a trip to the beach, and Sophia had gone all out, planning a romantic dinner overlooking the ocean. But even then, I noticed how often her phone buzzed with messages, and how she seemed to light up whenever Chris's name appeared on the screen. Still, I told myself I was overthinking. This was Sophia, my wife, the woman who had stood by me through everything. Surely she wouldn't betray the life we'd built together. But hindsight is a cruel teacher. Looking back, the signs were there, scattered like breadcrumbs leading to a truth I wasn't ready to face. I just didn't know it yet. Chris had always been there, Sophia's best friend since grade school, the fun uncle to our social circle, and a fixture at every major event in our lives. I had never questioned his place in Sophia's life. Why would I? He was charming, outgoing, and had a way of making himself indispensable. But now, as I piece everything together, I realize how blind I'd been. When Sophia and I first got married, Chris was like an extension of our relationship. He was the guy who'd help us move furniture, the one who always brought the best bottle of wine to dinner parties, and the person Sophia turned to for advice. He'd even helped us pick out the paint colors for our living room, something I should have found odd but didn't. Back then, I trusted him. He was part of the family, or so I thought. It wasn't until the past year that I started noticing the shift. Chris went from being a supportive friend to being everywhere. He was at our house more than ever, stopping by unannounced with some excuse. Just in the neighborhood? Thought you'd like this book. Needed to borrow a tool. At first, I didn't mind. I figured he was lonely, or maybe going through something he didn't want to talk about. But then, there were the inside jokes. Chris and Sophia had always shared a shorthand, but lately, it felt like they were speaking their own language. At dinner parties, they'd be off in a corner, laughing at something no one else understood. During conversations, he'd finish her sentences, and she'd look at him with this knowing smile that made me feel like an outsider in my own marriage. One evening, we were hosting a casual game night with friends. I was in the middle of explaining the rules of a card game when Chris made some offhand joke about how Sophia always cheats. She burst out laughing, nudging him playfully. "Don't expose me." It seemed harmless, but the way they exchanged that glance, like they shared a secret no one else could possibly understand, set my teeth on edge. After everyone left, I brought it up. "Does Chris have to be here all the time?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. Sophia frowned, clearly taken aback. "What are you talking about? He's my best friend. He's always been around." "Yeah, but lately it feels like he's too around," I said. She rolled her eyes, brushing me off. "You're being ridiculous. Chris is like family." I dropped it, not wanting to start a fight. But that nagging feeling in my gut didn't go away. Things escalated when Sophia started relying on Chris for things she used to turn to me for. "We're planning your surprise anniversary gift together," she said one day, her tone light and playful. "Shouldn't that be something you handle?" I asked, only half joking. "Oh, don't worry," she said with a wink. "Chris knows you almost as well as I do. He's got great ideas." That statement hit me harder than it should have. Knows me almost as well as you do? Was that supposed to be reassuring? The final straw came during a random Thursday night. I was working late in my home office when I heard laughter coming from the living room. Curious, I walked out to find Sophia and Chris sitting way too close on the couch, poring over her laptop. "What's so funny?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Chris smirked but didn't answer. Sophia waved me off. "Just work stuff. Chris is helping me brainstorm ideas for my client's event." At that moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of being excluded. This wasn't just a friendship anymore. It was something else, something deeper. And I was the third wheel in my own marriage. Looking back, I wish I'd trusted my instincts. Chris wasn't just her best friend. He was a wedge driving its way between us. And the worst part? I didn't see it for what it was until it was too late. I wanted to believe that Sophia loved me, that Chris was harmless, and that our marriage was unshakable. But as their connection grew stronger, I couldn't help but feel like I was watching everything I'd built slowly slip through my fingers. And the man who was supposed to be like family? He was the one pulling it all apart. The thing about red flags is that they rarely scream for attention. Instead, they whisper, planting seeds of doubt that slowly take root. At first, they're easy to ignore. You tell yourself you're imagining things, that you're overthinking. But eventually, those whispers grow louder until they're impossible to ignore. With Sophia and Chris, the whispers began as little things, moments I could rationalize. The way she'd light up when he entered the room. The way their inside jokes became so frequent I couldn't keep up. The way she started dressing differently when she knew he'd be around. I didn't want to believe it at first. After all, this was Sophia, my wife, my partner for nearly a decade. And Chris? He was her best friend, practically part of the family. But slowly, The whispers turned into a roar. It started with Sophia's appearance. She'd always been naturally beautiful, with a casual elegance that didn't need much effort. But recently, she seemed more deliberate. Her makeup more polished, her outfits more tailored, her perfume stronger. "New look?" I asked one morning as she stood in front of the mirror, applying lipstick. She smiled, glancing at me in the reflection. "Just trying something different. You like it?" "Of course," I said, though my tone was hesitant. I did like it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that her audience wasn't me. The changes were subtle but undeniable. Sophia had always been confident, but now there was a new energy in her, one that didn't seem to include me. Then there were the phone calls. Sophia had always been glued to her phone, scrolling through Pinterest or chatting with her friends. But now her conversations with Chris seemed different. I'd walk into the room and she'd quickly lower her voice or turn the screen away. "What's so secretive?" I teased one night as she laughed at something on her phone. "Nothing," she said, locking the screen. "Chris just sent a meme. You wouldn't get it. It's one of our inside jokes." Her casual dismissal stung, but I forced a smile and let it slide. The real turning point came when Liam, my best friend, pulled me aside during a barbecue. "Hey man," he started, his voice low. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure," I said, sipping my beer. "What's going on with Sophia and Chris?" he asked, glancing toward the patio where they stood, heads close together, laughing about something I couldn't hear. "What do you mean?" I asked, feigning ignorance. He raised an eyebrow. "You don't see it? The way they're always, I don't know, orbiting each other? Feels weird." I brushed him off, but his words lingered. The whispers turned into a dull roar the night Sophia came home late. She'd been out with Chris, planning my surprise anniversary gift, as she put it. "Sorry I'm late," she said breezily, setting her bag on the counter. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Of course," she said, flashing me a smile. "Chris had some great ideas for the party. You'll love it." I nodded, but my stomach churned. The party wasn't the problem. It was the way she said his name, the way her face lit up when she talked about him. I tried bringing it up to Sophia a few days later, choosing my words carefully. "Do you think you're spending too much time with Chris?" I asked, my tone casual. She frowned, setting down her coffee. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," I said quickly. "It's just, you've been seeing a lot of him lately, more than usual." She rolled her eyes. "He's my best friend, Derek. We're planning your anniversary surprise. Why are you being so weird about it?" Her defensiveness caught me off guard, but I didn't push further. The final red flag came at a dinner party we hosted for a few close friends. I stepped outside to grab something from the car and returned to find Sophia and Chris in the kitchen, their heads close together. She was laughing softly, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "Everything okay in here?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. They both looked up, startled. "Just talking about the playlist," Sophia said quickly, stepping back. Chris smirked but didn't say anything. I forced a smile and walked away, but the image of them stayed with me. Looking back, I realize I ignored the signs for far too long. I wanted to believe in Sophia, in our marriage, in the life we'd built together. But the red flags were there, glaring and undeniable. And deep down, I knew something was wrong. I just didn't want to admit it. The day started like any other anniversary. I woke up early, determined to make it special. After 10 years of marriage, you learn that it's the little gestures that matter most. I had breakfast ready, pancakes, fresh orange juice, and a card I'd written the night before. Sophia walked into the kitchen in her robe, her hair still tousled from sleep, and gave me a warm smile. "Happy anniversary," I said, leaning in to kiss her. "Happy anniversary," she replied, her voice soft and sweet. For a moment, everything felt normal, like we were still the couple who used to surprise each other with Post-it notes on the bathroom mirror, or dance in the kitchen to our favorite songs. But beneath the surface, something felt off. The day unfolded quietly. Sophia said she had errands to run, but assured me everything would be perfect for dinner. "Don't worry," she said, flashing her usual confident smile. "I've got everything under control." I didn't question it. I wanted to trust her. While she was out, I stayed home, finishing the final touches on a small gift I'd been working on, a photo album of our favorite moments together. As I flipped through the pictures, memories of happier times flooded back. Our honeymoon on the coast, lazy Sundays spent binge-watching shows, the way she used to laugh at my terrible jokes. But those memories felt distant now, like they belonged to another version of us. Sophia came back late in the afternoon, her arms full of groceries and decorations for the dinner. Chris followed close behind, carrying a bottle of wine and a bag of what looked like candles. "Chris is helping me set up," she said casually, brushing past me. I forced a smile, even as my stomach churned. "Of course he is," I muttered under my breath. The two of them moved around the kitchen like a well-rehearsed team, laughing and chatting as they prepared the meal. I tried to busy myself with other tasks, but their easy chemistry was impossible to ignore. As the evening progressed, the unease in my chest grew heavier. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something about the way they interacted felt too familiar. It wasn't just the way Chris leaned in when he spoke to her or the way Sophia's laughter seemed louder when he was around. It was the way they excluded me, like I was a guest in my own home. Dinner was served, and I tried to push my doubts aside. After all, this was our anniversary, a celebration of us. But even as we ate, I felt like a third wheel. Chris dominated the conversation, telling stories and cracking jokes that had Sophia in stitches. I sipped my wine, forcing myself to laugh along, even as resentment bubbled beneath the surface. It wasn't until dessert that everything came crashing down. I had stepped away to grab the cake from the fridge, and as I returned to the kitchen, I froze in my tracks. There they were, Sophia and Chris, locked in a kiss. Not a friendly peck or an innocent gesture, but a deep, passionate kiss that left no room for misinterpretation. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. My hands went numb, and the cake almost slipped from my grip. "What the hell is this?" I finally managed to choke out, my voice louder than I intended. Sophia jerked away from Chris, her face pale with shock. "Derek, it's nothing," Chris interrupted, his tone casual, even smug. "Just a friendly kiss." I saw red. Without thinking, I dropped the cake on the counter and lunged at him. My fist connected with his jaw, the crack echoing in the small kitchen. Chris stumbled back, clutching his face as Sophia screamed, "Derek, stop!" But I didn't stop. Years of frustration, betrayal, and suppressed anger poured out in that moment. "How dare you?" I shouted, my voice trembling with rage. "How dare you come into my home on my anniversary and do this?" Chris mumbled something incoherent, his words slurred from the pain. Sophia stood between us, tears streaming down her face, pleading with me to calm down. I took a step back, my chest heaving. "I'm done," I said, my voice low but firm. Whatever this is, it's over." And with that, I grabbed my keys and walked out, leaving behind the woman I thought I knew and the friend I thought I could trust. As I drove away, the weight of what I'd just witnessed began to sink in. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, my mind racing with questions I wasn't sure I wanted answers to. How long had this been going on? How could she do this to me, to us? One thing was clear. The life I thought we'd built together had been shattered in an instant. And there was no going back. I don't remember much of the drive after leaving the house. My mind was racing, a chaotic whirlwind of anger, betrayal, and disbelief. I pulled into the driveway at my sister Angela's house without realizing I'd even decided to go there. She answered the door within seconds, her eyes widening as she took in my disheveled state. "What happened?" she asked, stepping aside to let me in. I couldn't find the words right away. My throat felt tight and my chest burned. Finally, I managed to say, "Sophia, Chris, I caught them kissing." Angela's face darkened with a mix of fury and sadness. "That bastard," she muttered, pulling me into a hug. "You're staying here tonight. No arguments." That night was a blur. I sat on Angela's couch, staring blankly at the wall while she made tea and tried to comfort me. Her husband, Mark, gave me a knowing nod as he passed by, probably sensing that words weren't what I needed right now. When I finally managed to tell Angela everything, how I found them in the kitchen, how Chris smirked and called it just a friendly kiss, her reaction was exactly what I expected. "I always had a bad feeling about him," she said, pacing the room like a caged tiger. "He's always been too close to her, Derek. And Sophia, how could she let this happen? On your anniversary of all days." Her words were a balm and a blade. I wanted validation, but hearing someone else confirm my worst fears made it all feel more real. Over the next few days, I stayed with Angela and Mark, trying to piece myself back together. Sophia called and texted nonstop, her messages a mix of apologies, excuses, and pleas for me to come home. "Derek, I'm sorry. It didn't mean anything. It was a mistake, I swear. Please let me explain. We can fix this. Don't throw everything away." I read every message with a hollow ache in my chest, but I didn't reply. What was there to say? She made her choices, and now I had to make mine. Liam came over a few days later, bringing a six-pack and his usual blunt honesty. "So, what's the plan?" he asked, cracking open a beer. "I don't know," I admitted. "I don't even know where to start." He leaned back in his chair, studying me. "Start by figuring out what you want. Do you want to try to fix things with Sophia, or are you done?" The question hung heavy in the air. I wanted to scream that I was done, that I could never forgive her for what she did. But part of me still clung to the memories of who we used to be, to the life we'd built together. "She's been calling me," I said finally, "saying it was a mistake, that it didn't mean anything." Liam scoffed. "Didn't mean anything? Derek, you don't just kiss someone like that if it doesn't mean anything. Don't let her gaslight you." I nodded, knowing he was right. But knowing and accepting were two different things. Meanwhile, I started therapy, something Angela had insisted on. At first it felt strange, sitting in a room with a stranger and spilling my darkest thoughts. But Dr. Patel had a way of cutting through the noise in my head. "What do you feel right now?" she asked during our first session. "Angry," I said without hesitation. "Betrayed. Lost." She nodded. "And what do you want to feel?" That question stopped me in my tracks. I didn't have an answer. While I was trying to heal, Sophia was facing her own fallout. Angela, ever the detective, heard through mutual friends that Chris had filed a police report against me for breaking his jaw. It was the cherry on top of an already disastrous situation. "He's calling you unstable," Angela said one evening, her voice dripping with disgust. "Saying you overreacted and that it was all innocent." "Of course he is," I muttered. "He's a coward." And Sophia? She was caught in the middle. Chris had stopped talking to her, likely to save his own reputation, and the friends who once admired her were now whispering behind her back. Sophia called again one night, and this time I picked up. "Derek," she said, her voice trembling. "Can we talk, please?" I hesitated, then sighed. "Fine, tomorrow. Neutral ground." The next day we met at a quiet cafe. She looked tired, her usual glow replaced by dark circles and a strained expression. "I'm sorry," she began, tears pooling in her eyes. "I don't know what I was thinking. It was a mistake, a horrible, stupid mistake." I listened, my face unreadable as she poured out her regrets. "I know I hurt you," she said, her voice breaking. "I'll do anything to make it right. Just, please don't give up on us." I took a deep breath, my chest heavy. Sophia, you made your choices, and now I have to make mine. I need time. I need space. I can't promise you anything right now. Her tears fell freely, but I stood firm. I wasn't ready to forgive, and I wasn't sure I ever would be. As I walked out of the cafe, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Pain, anger, and a sliver of relief. For the first time, I was putting myself first. And that was a start. The aftermath of that night felt like stepping into a storm I hadn't prepared for. I moved out of the house and into my sister Angela's guest room, leaving Sophia behind in the home we had built together. It wasn't just about the space. It was about finding clarity, about stepping away from the memories and the betrayal that had consumed me. Angela, ever the protective sibling, didn't mince her words. "You need to focus on yourself now," she said, handing me a cup of coffee one morning. Let her deal with the mess she created. Easier said than done. The silence in Angela's house was deafening, giving my thoughts plenty of room to roam. I replayed that night in the kitchen over and over, dissecting every detail. The kiss, Chris's smug face, Sophia's desperate attempts to calm me down. It all haunted me like a bad dream I couldn't wake up from. Sophia, of course, didn't stay silent. The calls and messages started almost immediately. "Derek, please talk to me. It was a mistake. I swear it didn't mean anything. I love you. Don't throw everything away because of one stupid moment." At first, I ignored her, letting the messages pile up like unread emails. But each one chipped away at the wall I was trying to build around myself. The hardest part wasn't the anger. That burned hot and steady. It was the grief. The loss of the life I thought we had, the woman I thought she was. Liam dropped by a few days later, dragging me out for a beer. He listened as I vented, his expression a mix of sympathy and frustration. "You can't keep stewing in this, man," he said, clinking his bottle against mine. "She messed up, big time, but sitting here replaying it in your head isn't going to fix anything." "What am I supposed to do?" I asked, my voice heavy with exhaustion. "Pretend it didn't happen? Just move on like it's nothing?" "No," he said firmly. "You face it. You figure out what you want, whether that's forgiveness or closure or something else entirely. But don't let her control the narrative." He was right, of course. Liam usually was. But knowing what to do and actually doing it were two very different things. Meanwhile, Sophia's world was unraveling in its own way. Angela heard through mutual friends that Chris had filed a police report against me for breaking his jaw. The irony wasn't lost on me. He had the audacity to kiss my wife in my kitchen and then paint himself as the victim. "That guy's a piece of work," Angela said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Don't worry, everyone knows what really happened. Chris is just trying to save face." But it wasn't just Chris who was facing backlash. Sophia, too, was feeling the consequences of her actions. Her friends, once unwaveringly loyal, were starting to distance themselves. "She's trying to explain it away," Angela told me one evening, saying it was a moment of weakness, that it didn't mean anything. But people aren't buying it. Hearing this didn't bring me the satisfaction I thought it would. If anything, it made me feel sad. Sad that our marriage had become the subject of whispers and gossip. Sad that the woman I loved had brought this on herself. The turning point came when Sophia called again, and this time, I answered. "Derek," she began, her voice trembling. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need to explain." I let her talk, her words tumbling out in a rush of apologies and excuses. She sounded broken, desperate, like someone trying to cling to something already slipping through her fingers. "I was stupid," she said, her voice cracking. "I let Chris get too close. I didn't realize how far it had gone until it was too late." I stayed silent, letting her fill the void. "I love you," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've always loved you. Please don't give up on us." Her words hung heavy in the air, but they didn't pierce the armor I'd built around myself. Sophia, I said finally, my voice steady but firm. You made your choices. And now I have to make mine. She cried, begged, pleaded, but I didn't waver. For the first time, I felt a sense of clarity. Not closure, not forgiveness, but clarity. I couldn't go back, not after everything. As I hung up the phone, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and the faintest glimmer of hope. This wasn't the life I'd planned, but maybe, just maybe, it was the life I needed to rebuild. One step at a time. The news spread faster than I expected. Within days, the entire circle of people who knew us, family, friends, even casual acquaintances, seemed to have their own version of what had happened. It wasn't just my marriage that had fallen apart. It felt like my privacy had too. At first, the reactions were subtle. Friends texting to check in, family members calling under the guise of just wanting to say hi. But eventually, the real questions started coming. What happened, Derek? Is it true about Chris and Sophia? Are you okay? I wasn't okay, but I didn't have the energy to explain that to everyone. Angela, as always, was fiercely protective. She called out anyone who even hinted at blaming me for the situation. Don't you dare try to pin this on my brother, she snapped at one of our mutual friends, Kate, during a group dinner. He's the one who got betrayed, not the other way around. Kate raised her hands defensively. I'm not saying it's his fault. I'm just saying maybe he could have seen it coming. Angela's glare could have melted steel. And what exactly was he supposed to do? Babysit his wife and her so-called best friend every second of the day? Give me a break. I didn't say much during these confrontations, but Angela's unwavering support meant more to me than I could put into words. Liam, on the other hand, took a more straightforward approach. Forget the gossip, he said one night over beers. People will talk, but they'll move on. Focus on yourself, not what anyone else thinks. His advice was solid, but it was hard to ignore the whispers, especially when they came from people I once considered close friends. Not everyone sided with me, though. Sophia's sister, Rachel, was one of the first to reach out, and her tone was anything but sympathetic. Derek, I know you're upset, she said during a phone call. But don't you think you're overreacting? It was just a kiss. She made a mistake. She's only human. I clenched my jaw, struggling to keep my voice calm. It wasn't just a kiss, Rachel. It was a betrayal. On our anniversary, no less. She loves you, Rachel insisted. She's been beating herself up over this. Don't throw everything away because of one lapse in judgment. Lapse in judgment? I repeated, my voice colder than I intended. She kissed another man in our kitchen, Rachel. Her best friend, no less. How am I supposed to move past that? Rachel sighed, but she didn't press further. Still, her words lingered, making me question whether I was being too rigid, or if everyone else just didn't understand the depth of the hurt. The most surprising reactions came from some of our mutual friends. Some were supportive, like Greg, who pulled me aside during a gathering to say, "You didn't deserve this, man. If she couldn't see what she had in you, that's on her, not you." But others were less kind. "Derek," said Kate during another group dinner, "I get that you're hurt, but don't you think punching Chris was a bit extreme? Violence doesn't solve anything." I set down my fork and took a deep breath. What would you have done, Kate? Walked in on your spouse kissing someone else and just shrugged it off? She stammered, clearly uncomfortable, but didn't have an answer. Even within Sophia's social circle, cracks were beginning to show. People who once admired her started keeping their distance. Angela told me that some of her friends were whispering about the incident, speculating about how long it had been going on and whether Chris was the only one. Sophia's not in a great place right now, Angela admitted. She's losing friends left and right. And Chris, he's ghosted her completely. The thought of Sophia facing the fallout alone didn't bring me the satisfaction I thought it might. If anything, it made me sad. Sad for what we'd lost, for the woman I thought I knew, for the life we'd built that now felt like a distant memory. At the end of the day, it became clear that everyone had an opinion, but no one truly understood what I was going through. The betrayal wasn't just about the kiss. It was about trust, loyalty, and the foundation of a relationship I thought was unshakable. As Liam said, people would talk, and eventually, they'd move on. But for me, the healing process was just beginning, and that was a journey no one else could take for me. The call came late one evening, catching me off guard. I'd been trying to rebuild some semblance of normalcy, throwing myself into work, hitting the gym, even picking up an old hobby of sketching to keep my mind occupied. So, when my phone buzzed and I saw Sophia's name, I hesitated. Part of me wanted to let it ring out, to keep her voice on the other side of my carefully constructed wall. But curiosity got the better of me, as it often does. I answered. "Ryan?" she began, her voice shaky and uncertain, a far cry from the confident, polished woman I had once married. "What do you want, Sophia?" I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. I need to talk to you," she said. "In person, please." The silence stretched between us, heavy and loaded. Against my better judgment, I agreed. "Fine. Tomorrow, at the coffee shop near Angela's place." The next day, I arrived early, settling into a corner table where I could see the door. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but when Sophia walked in, I barely recognized her. She looked tired. Her makeup was minimal, her clothes less put together than usual, and there was a tension in her posture that hadn't been there before. She spotted me and offered a tentative smile before sitting down across from me. "Thanks for meeting me," she said softly, fiddling with the edge of her sleeve. "Get to the point," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. Her eyes darted around the cafe before she finally spoke. "Ryan, I made a mistake, a huge mistake, and now I don't even know how to fix it." I raised an eyebrow, folding my arms. "What's going on?" "It's Alex," she admitted, her voice trembling. After everything, I tried to keep things professional, to draw boundaries, but he's been making things unbearable." "Unbearable how?" I asked, my skepticism clear. She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "He's started excluding me from projects, spreading rumors about me to the team, making it seem like I'm the one who crossed a line. I thought rejecting him would end it, but it's only gotten worse." I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. On some level, I wasn't surprised. I'd seen Alex for what he was long before she had. Still, hearing her confirm it felt vindicating in a way. "And now you're regretting your choices?" I asked, unable to keep the bitterness out of my voice. Tears welled up in her eyes and she nodded. "Yes, Ryan, I am. I regret everything. Letting him get too close, jeopardizing our marriage. I let my guard down and I destroyed everything we had." For a moment, I let the silence stretch between us, watching as she crumbled under the weight of her own guilt. "I trusted you, Sophia," I said finally, my voice steady but filled with pain. "I trusted you with everything. And you threw it away for what? Attention? Validation?" She shook her head desperately. "It wasn't about that. I wasn't thinking. I thought it was harmless, but I see now how wrong I was. I let Alex manipulate me, and I hurt you in ways I can never take back." Her tears spilled over, but I didn't reach out to comfort her. I couldn't. "I'm sorry, Ryan," she whispered. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I need you to know how much I regret everything." I leaned back in my chair, exhaling deeply. "Regret doesn't erase what happened, Sophia. It doesn't fix the betrayal, or the fact that you prioritized someone else over our marriage. You made your choices. And now, you're dealing with the fallout." Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "Is there any chance we can rebuild this?" she asked, her voice barely audible. I shook my head. Trust isn't something you can patch up with an apology. It's earned day by day, and you shattered it. She nodded, wiping her tears. I understand. As I walked out of that coffee shop, I felt a mix of emotions, closure, sadness, and a strange sense of relief. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in months, I felt like I was finally taking control of my life again. Whatever happened to Sophia from here was her responsibility, not mine. She'd have to face Alex, her mistakes, and her own choices. As for me, it was time to start moving forward. Alone, but stronger. After our conversation at the coffee shop, I thought I'd feel a sense of closure. I had said my piece, laid everything out on the table, and walked away. But closure isn't something that comes in one clean moment. It lingers, twisting and turning in ways you don't expect. Sophia's world continued to unravel, as I learned through whispers and casual updates from mutual friends. Alex, the man she'd defended so many times, had turned against her completely. His charm was nothing but a mask, and now that she had rejected him, he was making her professional life unbearable. "He's spreading lies about me, Ryan," she told me in one of her messages. "Telling people I'm unprofessional, that I don't deserve my position. He's pulling me off major projects and isolating me at work. I don't know what to do." I read her words without responding, my emotions a swirl of vindication and sadness. I'd warned her about Alex, hadn't I? I'd seen the way he looked at her, the subtle manipulation in his every move. But she hadn't listened, and now she was reaping the consequences of her choices. The real fallout came when Sophia's colleagues started to distance themselves. Angela, who seemed to have a direct line to every rumor in our social circle, filled me in on the details. "People at her office are talking," Angela said one evening. "Some are siding with her, saying Alex is a predator, but others are questioning her integrity. It's messy, Ryan. She's struggling." "She should have seen it coming," I replied, my voice harsher than I intended. Angela looked at me carefully. "Maybe, but that doesn't mean it's easy for her now." I didn't respond. I wasn't ready to feel pity for Sophia. Not yet. Despite everything, Sophia kept reaching out. Her messages were filled with apologies and regret, each one more desperate than the last. "I know I let him manipulate me," she wrote one day. "I see now how toxic he was, but I didn't realize it until it was too late. I'm sorry for everything, Ryan. For hurting you, for destroying us. Please believe me." I wanted to believe her. A part of me still cared for the woman I had loved, the woman I had built a life with. But the damage was done, and her realization came too late. Sophia's final attempt to reach out came in the form of a letter. Handwritten, thoughtful, raw. "Ryan," it began, "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect anything from you. But I need you to know that I am truly sorry. I let myself get caught up in something I thought I could control, and I lost sight of what mattered most. You. United States. I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself for what I did, but I hope, one day, you can find it in your heart to forgive me." I read the letter twice before folding it carefully and putting it in a drawer. It wasn't forgiveness she needed. It was accountability. And forgiveness, if it ever came, wasn't something I was ready to give. Sophia's fall was complete, but it wasn't my responsibility to catch her. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with them. As for me, I was done looking back. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, it felt like my own. The day the divorce was finalized felt strangely quiet, almost anticlimactic. There was no dramatic showdown, no explosive arguments, just signatures on paper, a few legal formalities, and the unspoken acknowledgement that the life we'd built together was officially over. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt a mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and a strange sense of liberation. The weight of betrayal Anger and uncertainty had finally been lifted. For the first time in months, I felt like I could start focusing on myself and what lay ahead. Rebuilding wasn't easy, but it was necessary. At first, the days felt hollow, like I was simply going through the motions. Work became my anchor. I poured myself into my projects, taking on new challenges and reconnecting with colleagues I'd drifted from. The structure helped, giving me a sense of purpose when everything else felt chaotic. Liam, my best friend, became my unofficial therapist. "You need to get out of your own head," he said one evening, dragging me to a hiking group he'd joined. At first, I resisted. Socializing felt like the last thing I wanted to do. But standing on a mountaintop, the crisp air filling my lungs, I realized how much I'd needed it. The outdoors became my escape, a way to remind myself that life was bigger than my pain. It was during one of those hikes that I met Emily. She wasn't flashy or overly charismatic like Sophia. She was grounded, down to earth, with a quiet confidence that immediately put me at ease. We started chatting during a break on the trail, sharing stories about our favorite travel destinations. She was a teacher, passionate about her students and her work. Her laughter was warm, genuine, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a spark. Not a blazing fire, but a comforting warmth. Over the next few weeks, we crossed paths at more group events. Conversations flowed effortlessly, and I found myself looking forward to seeing her. Emily wasn't trying to fill the gaps Sophia had left. She was simply showing me that life could move forward, one step at a time. As I sat on my porch one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I reflected on everything that had happened. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the anger. It had all shaped me, but it didn't define me. Sophia had been a part of my life, and while the scars she left would always be there, they were reminders of lessons learned. I'd learned to value myself, to set boundaries, and to recognize my own worth. The future felt uncertain, but for the first time, that uncertainty didn't scare me. I wasn't looking for answers or closure anymore. I was simply ready to embrace whatever came next. Meeting Emily didn't erase the past, but it reminded me that life goes on. There's beauty in starting over, in rediscovering who you are and what you want. And as I sat there, the sound of crickets filling the air, I realized I wasn't just moving on,